Howard Hughes, The Untold Life Story. If you enjoy the content, please consider subscribing and liking the video. It truly helps the channel grow. Howard Robard Hughes Jr. was born on December 24, 1905, in Houston, Texas, at a moment when the United States was racing into the modern age. Oil derricks were rising, cities were growing, and new machines were changing everyday life. In the middle of this world of steel, dust, and opportunity, the Hughes family built its own fortune. Howard's father, Howard Hughes Sr., was a determined engineer and businessman who created a revolutionary drill bit that could cut through hard rock and oil fields. His invention made drilling faster, deeper, and far more profitable, and it turned the Hughes Tool Company into a money-making engine. Howard's mother, Aline, came from a well-regarded Texas family and poured her energy into raising her only child with care, discipline, and constant attention to his health. From the very beginning, young Howard's world was a strange mix of freedom and control. On one hand, he had wealth, tools, and space to experiment. On the other, his mother worried deeply about illness. She checked his temperature, monitored his diet, and built routines to protect him from germs and disease. These habits made him feel both safe and confined. At the same time, his father's workshop and the company's machines opened an entirely different door. Howard wandered among tools and metal parts, watching workers assemble equipment that would be shipped out to oil fields around the country. He saw how a single idea, turned into a piece of steel, could change everything. Howard showed an early, intense curiosity about how things worked. He took apart clocks to study their gears, examined radios to understand their wiring, and built small gadgets out of leftover pieces of metal and wood. At the age of 11, he put together a motorized bicycle, attaching a small engine that rattled and smoked as it pushed him along the street. Neighbors stared as this thin, serious boy sped past on a homemade machine. To them, it looked like a novelty. To Howard, it felt like the future: speed, control, and invention all wrapped into one. Yet beneath this inventive energy was a boy who often felt alone. He was shy, introverted, and uncomfortable in big social groups. His mother's constant fears about his health made him cautious, and the family's wealth set him apart from other children. While they played games, he tinkered with machinery. While they relaxed, he watched, thought, and built. These differences fed his sense of being separate, even as they helped sharpen his focus and ambition. Then, in his teenage years, life changed abruptly. First, his mother died, leaving a hole in his world that no routine could fill. Not long after, his father also passed away. In barely 2 years, Howard lost the two people who had shaped his life the most. He was still only 18 when lawyers placed a stack of papers in front of him and explained that he now controlled the Hughes Tool Company and its growing wealth. Many adults expected him to step back and let experienced managers run things. Instead, he quietly but firmly insisted on signing the papers himself and taking full control. In that moment, he made a choice that would define his life. He would be the one to steer his destiny, no matter how risky or unconventional his path might be. Soon after, he left Texas and moved to Los Angeles. The city was exploding with energy. The film industry was booming, and Hollywood was quickly becoming a global symbol of romance, adventure, and stardom. To Howard, movies were more than entertainment. They were a blend of technology and storytelling, a place where cameras, lights, editing, and sound all came together to shape powerful illusions. He wanted to be part of that world, not just as a spectator, but as a creator. With his inheritance as fuel, Hughes set up his own production company and began looking for stories that could match his appetite for drama and spectacle. His first great ambition was Hell's Angels, a World War I aviation epic. He wanted audiences to feel what it was like to be inside a fighter plane, diving and climbing through the sky in deadly combat. To achieve this, he bought dozens of aircraft, hired hundreds of pilots, and turned open fields into temporary air bases and film sets. The air sequences were extremely dangerous. Pilots flew low, close to one another, and through smoke and explosions. Several crashes occurred, and some people were killed. Hughes was shaken but refused to scale back. He believed that greatness required risk. As filming dragged on, a new technology arrived that changed the rules of cinema: synchronized sound. Silent films were suddenly old-fashioned. Instead of accepting that his nearly finished film might arrive too late, Hughes made a radical decision. He went back and reshot large sections of the movie to include spoken dialogue. He even took flying lessons and piloted some of the stunts himself, pushing his own limits in the air. When Hell's Angels finally premiered in 1930, it was one of the most expensive films ever made. Critics were divided over the story and acting, but almost everyone agreed on one thing: the aerial combat scenes were stunning, more intense and realistic than anything audiences had ever seen. Hell's Angels made Hughes a major player in Hollywood. He followed it with films like Scarface, a brutal gangster drama that fought battles with censors, and The Outlaw, a western that stretched the boundaries of what was acceptable on screen. Time and again, he clashed with film boards and authority figures, often using legal delays and clever publicity to get his way. Directors and studio workers learned that Hughes could be inspiring but exhausting. He demanded endless takes, insisted on small technical changes, and often worked through the night. His mix of money, vision, and stubbornness gave him power, but it also made him a difficult partner. While he was making waves in Hollywood, Hughes's thoughts kept drifting to something else: airplanes themselves. He had loved flight since childhood, and now he had the resources to do more than simply ride in planes. He wanted to design them, test them, and break records in them. In 1932, he founded Hughes Aircraft Company. At first, it was a modest operation: a small team of engineers, a few hangars, and some ambitious sketches. But Hughes pushed hard. He wanted airplanes that were faster, smoother, and more efficient than anything that had flown before. The result of this drive was the Hughes H-1 Racer, a silver monoplane that seemed to leap out of the future. Every detail was tuned for speed. The wings were sleek and carefully curved. The engine cowling was tight-fitting, the rivets were flush, and the landing gear retracted into the body to reduce drag. On September 13, 1935, Hughes climbed into the cockpit, took off, and pushed the H-1 to a record-breaking speed of 352 miles per hour. Newspapers across the United States carried photographs of the young, handsome tycoon standing next to his shining aircraft. He spoke modestly about the achievement, saying that the plane pointed the way toward better, safer commercial aviation. 2 years later, he set another record, flying from Los Angeles to New York in just over 7 hours and shaving hours off the previous mark. But his most famous flight came in 1938, when he set out to fly around the world. Using a specially modified Lockheed 14, he and his crew circled the globe in only 91 hours. When they landed in New York, huge crowds gathered. Ticker tape rained down from windows. Hughes received medals, trophies, and personal congratulations from the president. Yet even amid the celebration, he remained oddly calm, more interested in the future of air travel than in his own glory. To him, every record was a test and a hint of what might still be possible. As the world moved toward World War II, Hughes aircraft began to take on military contracts. One of the most ambitious was the H-4 Hercules, later nicknamed the Spruce Goose. It was designed as an enormous flying boat that could carry troops and supplies over long distances while using wood instead of wartime metals. The project grew larger and more complex over time. Costs soared. Delays piled up. Critics in government and the press seized on the Hercules as a symbol of waste and ego. Investigations and hearings followed, and Hughes found himself under public attack. He responded not with retreat, but with defiance. At a congressional hearing, he famously defended himself and his work, arguing that innovation required bold attempts and that he had invested his own money into the project. Then, in November 1947, during what was supposed to be only a taxi test in Long Beach Harbor, Hughes made a dramatic move. Sitting at the controls, he pushed the throttles forward. The gigantic aircraft gathered speed, lifted off the water, and flew roughly a mile before settling back down. It was a short flight, but it proved that the much-mocked aircraft could indeed fly. The Hercules never took off again, but the image of that one flight became part of aviation legend. Just a few months earlier, Hughes's relationship with risk had almost killed him. In July 1946, he was test flying the XF-11, an experimental reconnaissance plane, when a mechanical failure caused the aircraft to crash in a Beverly Hills neighborhood. The plane tore through houses and burst into flames. Hughes was pulled from the wreckage barely alive. His injuries were severe: shattered ribs, burns, a collapsed lung, and major internal damage. Doctors struggled to keep him alive, and his recovery took months. To endure the pain, he was given strong narcotic painkillers, and he continued using them long after the immediate danger had passed. The crash left scars not only on his body, but also on his mind. His already strong perfectionism hardened. His fear of germs and illness deepened. His need for control grew more intense. Despite this, Hughes continued to expand his influence. Through complex stock purchases, he became the controlling force behind Trans World Airlines, TWA. Under his direction, TWA upgraded its planes, added new routes, and promoted itself as a stylish, cutting-edge airline. Passengers associated TWA with sophistication and safety. But inside the boardroom, tensions grew. Hughes's secretive working style, refusing to attend meetings, issuing long written instructions instead of speaking directly, and making major decisions without explanation, frustrated other executives and shareholders. Eventually, legal battles and government pressure forced him to give up control of the airline. The loss hit him hard. Aviation had been his proudest field of achievement, and being pushed aside hurt deeply. By the early 1960s, Hughes's life took a dramatic turn inward. He withdrew from public appearances, avoided photographers, and stopped giving interviews. His fear of germs, once a quirk, became a powerful force that dictated his daily routine. He began living in hotel suites with sealed windows and drawn curtains. He forbade unnecessary visitors. He made his staff follow elaborate rules about washing hands, handling objects with tissues, and presenting food in highly controlled ways. He spent long hours alone, watching movies, listening to the radio, and issuing detailed memos to his aides. In Las Vegas, he quietly bought hotel casinos and large plots of land. His arrival helped shift the city away from mob-dominated ownership toward corporate control. Even though almost no one ever saw him, his decisions shaped the skyline and economy. Las Vegas grew into a larger, more commercial, and increasingly family-oriented destination, and Hughes's investments played a key role in that transformation. He became a kind of invisible king of the city, commanding vast assets without ever appearing on the casino floor. Behind closed doors, however, his world shrank. His health deteriorated. He ate irregularly and became thin and frail. His dependence on painkillers increased. He rarely bathed or changed clothes. His hair and fingernails grew long and tangled. His memos to staff became more repetitive and sometimes hard to follow, bouncing between precise technical requests and anxious instructions about cleanliness. The man who had once stood proudly beside record-breaking aircraft now spent his days in dark rooms, surrounded by medicine bottles, boxes of tissues, and handwritten notes. In the 1970s, Hughes moved from place to place in secrecy. He lived for a time in the Bahamas, then in Nicaragua, then in Mexico, always occupying high floors of hotels, always hidden from view. A small circle of aides and doctors navigated the delicate balance of caring for him while obeying his often conflicting orders. His physical condition worsened dramatically. He suffered from malnutrition, chronic pain, and the long-term effects of drug use and untreated ailments. On April 5, 1976, Howard Hughes was being flown from Acapulco to Houston, where doctors hoped to treat his worsening health problems. Somewhere in the sky over the Gulf of Mexico, he died on board the plane. He was 70 years old. When his body was examined, the doctors were stunned by his appearance. He was emaciated, with long hair and nails, bearing little resemblance to the charismatic young pilot and producer whose adventures had once filled newspapers. Yet the human details of Hughes's life add even more texture to this picture. During his years in Hollywood and aviation, he dated some of the most famous actresses of the era, including Katharine Hepburn, Ava Gardner, and others whose names lit up marquees. With them, he could be witty, attentive, and surprisingly gentle. He sent flowers, arranged private screenings, and sometimes simply sat quietly, listening. But intimacy made him uneasy. His need for control, his long work hours, and his growing anxieties often pushed people away. Relationships flared brightly and then faded. Many women who knew him later described a man who seemed to belong more to his obsessions than to any ordinary life. Hughes also played a quieter but important role in science and medicine. In the 1950s, he established the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, originally as part of his aircraft company. Over time, it evolved into a major philanthropic foundation devoted to biomedical research. Long after Hughes withdrew from public life, the institute he created would fund scientists, support laboratories, and contribute to breakthroughs in understanding disease. In this way, a man who feared illness might indirectly have helped humanity fight it, even as he struggled with his own health. The end of Hughes's life did not resolve his mysteries. After his death, lawyers, investigators, and family members spent years untangling his finances. Rumors of secret wills surfaced. Some were revealed as forgeries. The Hughes empire, aircraft, hotels, land, stock holdings, and intellectual property, had to be divided and sold. Out of this complicated process, the Howard Hughes Medical Institute emerged as one of the main heirs, receiving a large share of what he had built. His aircraft operations eventually became part of larger defense and aerospace companies. The casinos and hotels changed hands. The man was gone, but the structures he created lived on in new forms. What remains most vivid, though, is not the legal paperwork or the balance sheets, but the contrast at the heart of his story. Here was a man who once stood in front of newsreel cameras, confident and articulate, describing how airplanes could shrink the world. The same man, decades later, hid from nearly everyone, terrified of germs on doorknobs and dust on plates. Here was a person who took enormous risks in the air, flying experimental aircraft at the edge of their performance, yet struggled to face the ordinary risks of human contact. The contrast is striking, and it is what gives his story such lasting power. Today, when we watch dramatizations of his life or read biographies about him, it is easy to see Hughes as an almost fictional character, too extreme, too unusual, too cinematic to have been real. But the documents, films, recordings, and eyewitness accounts all point to the same conclusion. Howard Hughes truly lived this way. He really did build and fly record-breaking aircraft. He really did spend years behind closed hotel doors. He really did influence the shape of cities and industries. The tension between his public achievements and private struggles makes his life feel like a mirror reflecting both the promise and the pressure of the modern age. If we imagine his life as a documentary film, the camera might move through a series of striking scenes. First, a boy in Houston, bent over a workbench, taking apart a clock. Then a young man in flying goggles, climbing into the cockpit of the H-1 racer under a bright desert sun. Then a crowded New York street, paper confetti swirling as people cheer the aviator who has just flown around the world. Then the vast shape of the Spruce Goose lifting off the water for its single, unforgettable flight. Then the neon glow of Las Vegas, casinos rising from the desert, built with money from a man no one ever sees. Finally, the camera would drift into a darkened hotel room, where curtains are closed, and a thin figure sits alone, surrounded by notes, medicine, and the echo of engines that no longer roar. Howard Hughes's story is not simple. It is a story of incredible ambition and heartbreaking vulnerability, of triumph and collapse, of a mind that reached for the sky and then retreated into shadows. He changed the way planes were built, the way movies were made, and the way cities could grow from the desert. He also showed that genius does not protect a person from fear, illness, or loneliness. In the end, Howard Hughes remains one of the most fascinating figures of the 20th century, a man whose life played out like a long, complex film, full of soaring highs and devastating lows. His achievements continue to influence aviation, film, and business. His struggles remind us that even those who seem unstoppable can be fighting battles the world never sees. And his legend endures, a mix of fact and myth, as unforgettable as the roar of an engine climbing through a clear blue sky.